Good morning, or excuse me, good afternoon, and welcome back, one and all, to Virtual Storytime from the Newark Public Library. As always, we are recording this live story stream on land that rightfully belongs to the Lenape Indian tribe, and if you are tuning in from anywhere in our fair city of Newark, New Jersey, you are probably on land that rightfully belongs to the Lenape Indians as well. I am your host, Mix Alley. That is mix just like mixing bowl, not to be confused with Miss, Ms, Mr, or Mrs, because, as you can see, I am not a boy, nor am I a girl. I'm a unicorn. And so is my storytelling companion. Please put your hands together for the one and only Jonathan Van Unicorn! Oh, hello! How delightful to see every single one of you on this beautiful afternoon, Mix Alley. It's afternoon. I know it is, Jonathan, and I said it with such confidence, too, when I said good morning. You really did, but you know what, Mix Alley? That's the best way to make a mistake. Do it with confidence, and then correct yourself very humbly. I think you did just fine. Well, Jonathan, I really appreciate that vote of confidence. Thanks so much. Jonathan, how are you feeling after our story time this morning? Oh, I'm feeling much better. I don't know if anyone who's watching now happened to catch our 11 a.m. story stream this morning, but I talked about how I had been experiencing some anxiety, which is another word for worry or fear, and McSally read a book all about how to calm yourself and find your bravery when you're feeling scared. And you know what, McSally? I've been feeling a lot better since then. Jonathan, I'm so glad to hear that. If any of you are interested in hearing the story we read this morning and learning some of the strategies for coping with anxiety or worry that we talked about this morning, you can go back and find that video and watch it. But Jonathan, in the event that someone wants to learn a way to cope with anxiety right now, what is one of your favorite things that we learned this morning about what you can do when you feel scared or anxious? Oh, I think my favorite one was the one about scanning for safety. Oh, yeah, I love that one too, Jonathan. Can you show everyone how that works? Oh, yes. So, a lot of the time, when you are feeling scared or anxious, your body and your brain, they're trying to let you know that you need to keep yourself safe. Right. That's one of the main things we learned this morning. Exactly. And sometimes all you need to do is look around in order to realize that you are not in immediate danger. So what we do is we look to the left, we look to the right, we look all around us, and anything that we notice, anything that catches our eye, we can look at for a bit. Like I'm drawn to this picture of a unicorn, so I'm just going to look at that for a while. And I'm remembering as I look around that I'm not in any immediate danger. I am safe in Mix Alley's home studio and bedroom, and everything's all right, and I have the strength to do whatever I need to do today. Jonathan, I am so happy to hear that that's working well for you. I hope that maybe it's working well for other folks too. I will share another of the strategies that we learned this morning, one that always works really well for me. Sometimes it helps to just, wherever you're sitting or standing, to notice your body. And that sounds so easy, but a lot of the time, Jonathan, I don't know if this happens to you, but when I feel anxious, my breath gets shorter, my heart beats a little faster, I can feel shaky or jittery. That's because my body is afraid that it's not safe. So if I just take a moment and feel the weight of my behind if I'm sitting down, or my feet on the ground if I'm standing up, I remember that it is safe here in my body. I have control over my body, and I get to decide what happens to it. And that also makes me feel calmer and braver. Yes, I really like that too, McSally. You know, the problem is when I visit you here in my human world unicorn form, I don't have a behind or feet, so the scanning for safety works a lot better for me. That makes total sense, Jonathan. Well, I think we'll probably go over some of the strategies that we learned again, but just to review quickly, to finish up this review of things you can do when you feel anxious, the other strategies that we learned scan for safety, we learned, ground yourself in your body. We also learned notice what you can sense with your 5 senses, and we also talked about just breathing deeply in and out. So any of those that you that seem like they would be helpful to you, try them out. Do share in the comments if you have experiences with them that you want to share, or other ideas you want to share with our community. And you know, it's really important right now to make sure that you know how to feel strong when you feel afraid. So we'll be going over those strategies a lot more on Virtual Storytime, I think. Does that sound good, Jonathan? Oh yes, I really like that idea. All right. Well, Jonathan, another thing you mentioned this morning is that stories also make you feel calm and safe. Oh, yes, that is absolutely true. So we're going to read more stories this afternoon, isn't that right? We are indeed. That's one of the biggest reasons we have Virtual Storytime, is because it feels really good to settle down and listen to a story. So we're going to do that, and then, of course, we are going to have a unicorn dance party, as we always do. Dancing is also a great way to feel at home and peaceful and joyful in your own body and your own space. Oh, marvelous. I was hoping that we'd do all that. So what are we going to read today, McSally? Well, first we're going to read a Norwegian folktale. It is called East of the Sun and West of the Moon. And then, before we break for our unicorn dance party, we will be returning to our chapter book, Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. Oh, marvelous! All right, well, I'm going to take a seat and listen, McSally. All right, Jonathan, you go ahead and do that. And everyone else take a minute to get cozy. Whew. If you're feeling a little anxious today, maybe try some of those strategies. It sounds like my cats are experiencing some unresolved, intense feelings at the moment, so I'm going to give them their own space and make sure that they do not interrupt story time. One moment, please. All right, kitties. It's story time. Be nice to each other. Or if you have an important conversation, please have it outside in the kitchen. Thank you, my darlings. All right, here we go. So this is the story East of the Sun and West of the Moon. It is from this collection of feminist folktales from around the world, The Maid of the North. It's been edited by Ethel Johnston Phelps and illustrated by Lloyd Bloom. And you know, we talk a lot during our afternoon story time about how we always make an effort to tell fairy tales or folk tales from all around the world during afternoon story time. But one of the things that I love about reading stories from other parts of the world, other cultures, is that we don't just learn that there are more fairy tales than Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, the ones that if you're growing up in the United States you tend to be familiar with them. We learn that there's a lot more out there, but we also learn that people all over the world, often they tell stories about really similar things, because as humans we have a lot in common, and there are a lot of great reasons that we tell stories, and there are a lot of things that we all have in common that we decide to tell stories about. We've talked earlier this week, since we read a creation myth from West Africa, we've talked about how a lot of different cultures and religions have their own myths of creation about how the world was made. There are also a lot of different places in the world where there is a story Similar to Cinderella, for instance, there's a Chinese version of Cinderella and a French version called Cendrillon, which I just love to say. And today, you're going to discover that in Norway, this story, East of the Sun and West of the Moon, was created, and it has a lot in common with the story of Beauty and the Beast. So if you like that story, you may recognize some of the same ideas that you've heard about in Beauty and the Beast in this story, East of the Sun, West of the Moon. If you're feeling intellectually ambitious today, I would love for you to think about the things that this story has in common with Beauty and the Beast and the way that it's different. And if you are just feeling like, I'm so tired and all I want is to listen to a good story, McSally, then just do that. That is fine too. East of the Sun and West of the Moon. Once upon a time, there was a poor woodcutter and his wife living in a forest who had so many children that they could scarcely feed and clothe them. They were all fine children, but the bravest and most cheerful was the oldest daughter. One evening late in the year, when the cold wind blew hard against their little cottage, they heard a loud knock on the door. The father got up from the hearth and went outside to see who it was. A large white bear stood outside the door, waiting for him. "Good evening to you," said the white bear. "Good evening," said the woodcutter politely. If you open your door and suddenly there's an enormous bear standing outside, probably a good idea to be polite. You don't know what kind of mood he's in. "I've taken a fancy to your eldest daughter," said the white bear. "If she will come away to live with me, I can promise your family prosperity and good fortune." "No, indeed," said the woodcutter. "I would rather stay as poor as we are than let my daughter go off to live with a white bear." The bear looked at him sadly. "Perhaps you will change your mind. I'll return next week." But the woodcutter shook his head and closed the door. The eldest daughter, who had been standing near the open door, had heard the bear's words. She thought that the white bear had a gentle and kind manner. He was a bear, but he did not seem at all fierce. The lass thought about the bear's request for several days. She made up her mind that when the bear came back— oh, hello, Kaylee. One of my cats is being very polite and has been allowed to stay in the room for story time. She made up her mind that when the bear came back, she would go off with him and marry him. And neither her father nor her mother could talk her out of it. When the bear returned in exactly 1 week, the lass answered his knock and said she was ready to go with him. She said farewell to her family, climbed on his shaggy back, and off they went. "Are you afraid?" said the white bear. "No, not at all," said the lass. "There is nothing to fear," said the white bear. "Hold tight to my fur, and you won't fall off." They traveled this way for a long time, until at last they came to a steep cliff. The white bear knocked on the rocky face of the cliff, and a door opened for them. Inside was a fine castle of many rooms, all brightly lit and brightly furnished. The bear led the way to a room where a table was laid and supper was waiting. Then he gave the lass a small silver bell. Whenever she wanted anything, said the bear, she was to ring the bell, and it would be brought to her. The lass thanked him, and the bear left. The lass was very hungry, so she ate the supper. Then, very sleepy from her long journey, she found a bedchamber and went to sleep. She lived cheerfully in the castle under the hill for some months. Her only companion all this time was the white bear, and as time went on, she became quite fond of him. But although he talked with her quite gaily, he would answer no questions about either the castle or himself. Only one thing troubled her. At night, just as she was falling asleep, she would hear someone come into the room and lie down. In the morning, when she awoke, there was no one to be seen. She puzzled over this for some time, wondering if it was the white bear who came into the room, or perhaps a strange underground creature of some kind. Who do you think it is? She grew silent, thinking about it. The white bear, noticing her silence, said, "Lass, this castle and all that is in it are yours. I wish you could be happy here. The silver bell will bring you anything you want. Ask me no questions. Trust me, and nothing shall harm you." "I do trust you," said the lass. "Are you tired of my company?" asked the white bear sadly. "Do you wish me to go away?" "No," said the lass warmly, "I have become very fond of you." But she became more and more curious about the creature who came into her room at night. Since she could ask no questions, she resolved to find out for herself. The next night, she stayed awake until she heard the creature come into the room and fall deeply asleep. Then she got up and lit a candle. When she brought the candle over to gaze down at the sleeping figure, she could scarcely believe her eyes. It was a young man with fair hair and a pleasant, open face. As she gazed in surprise, 3 drops of hot wax fell from her candle onto his white shirt. The young man woke up. He stared at her in sorrow. "Oh, lass, what you have done will bring grief to us both. A wicked troll has bewitched me so that I am a white bear by day and a man by night. There is only one way for me to break the enchantment. If you had willingly stayed with me for a whole year without knowing my true form, I would be freed. Now that you have seen me, I will still be in their power." "Surely there is something I can do to save you," cried the lass. He shook his head. "I must leave you now to return to the land of the trolls." "Can I come with you?" she asked. "I am not afraid." But again he shook his head. "Tell me the way then," she said. "I will search for you until I find you." He looked at her with gratitude and love. "I'm afraid you will never find that place. Very few mortals can. It lies east of the sun and west of the moon, and there is no road that leads to it." Before he could say anything more, both the man and the castle had disappeared. The lass found herself sitting in the middle of a forest, dressed in the ragged clothes she had worn the first time that she met the bear. "I failed to help the white bear break the enchantment," she thought, "but if I seek him out in the land of the trolls, I may be able to help him escape their power." So she started off and walked many weary days, asking everyone she met, "Can you tell me the way to the place that lies east of the sun and west of the moon?" But no one had ever heard of that place, until one day she met an old woman who said kindly, "I have heard that a prince is held prisoner in a castle that lies east of the sun and west of the moon. How to get there I do not know. Ask the east wind." The lass walked and walked until she reached the home of the east wind. There she asked the east wind if he knew the way to the castle east of the sun and west of the moon. "I have never heard of it. Or, I have heard of it," said the east wind, "but I don't know the way. I have never blown so far." Perhaps the west wind knows. I will carry you to her, lass. With a gentle swoop, she was lifted up into the air and carried along over the earth to the home of the west wind. This lass seeks the prince in the castle east of the sun and west of the moon, said the east wind. Do you know where it is? No, said the west wind, I have never blown that far. I will take her to the south wind, who has traveled over more lands than we have. With a brisk flurry, the west wind took her up into the clouds and carried her along swiftly. Are you afraid? Called the west wind. Not at all, said the lass. People keep asking this girl if she's afraid, but her answer is always no. When at last they reached the home of the south wind, the west wind told of the lass's quest. I've blown over many lands, said the south wind, but I've not seen such a place. I'll take the lass to the north wind. The north wind is the oldest and strongest of us. If the north wind does not know where it is, it cannot be found. The south wind lifted her high above the earth and carried her along on the strong, steady breeze until they reached the cold home of the north wind. What do you want? Roared the north wind. You needn't be so cross, said the south wind. I have a brave lass here, who seeks the prince in the castle east of the sun, west of the moon. Have you ever been there? I know where it is, said the north wind. It's a great distance. I blew an aspen leaf there once, and I was so tired I had to rest before I could return. Can you tell me the way? Asked the lass. I will go myself. No need for that, growled the north wind. If you are not afraid to come with me, I'll carry you there. I'm not afraid, said the lass. I will go with you. Thank you, for I must get there as fast as I can. The north wind blew hard, and with a roar, they shot up into the air high above the land and seas. Down below, a storm raged over the sea. Trees were uprooted and ships tossed madly. They tore on and on over the sea until even the north wind became weaker and weaker. They dropped down lower and lower over the crests of the waves. The icy spray splashed her legs. Are you afraid? Puffed the north wind. No, I am not afraid, she replied, but she was glad to see the outline of land ahead. With a final burst of strength, the north wind dropped her on the shore close to the castle that lay east of the sun and west of the moon. I must rest a day on the shore, puffed the north wind faintly. This is no place for a lass. Are you sure you want to stay? The lass said she must free the prince if she could, so she thanked the north wind and went on her way. Since it was still daylight, there was not a troll to be seen. She walked to the castle and sat down near the gates to think of how she could free the prince. As soon as the sun went down, out came the trolls. Hairy, red-eyed creatures, scurrying about, chattering and shrieking to one another in great excitement. The sight of them was enough to scare the bravest mortal. But the lass had come this far in her quest, and she would not hesitate now. Gathering her courage, she walked boldly up to one of the troll women. Can you tell me what is going on? She asked politely. Is there some work I could do for a night's lodging and a bit of food? Tonight is the night the prince must choose a bride from among us, cried the troll woman exultantly. When the moon stands high over the treetops, we meet in that clearing by the old oak, and the one who can wash the 3 spots of candle wax from his shirt can claim the prince." The troll woman shrieked with glee as she hurried off after the others. Trolls were coming to the clearing from all directions, so the lass followed them. In the clearing was a large pot of water, and in the front of it sat rows of chattering trolls. When the moon stood high above the treetops, the prince came with his shirt. He looked about at the throng of trolls and grew pale. But when he saw the lass standing alone at the rear of the crowd, he smiled in relief. "Now we'll begin," said a troll woman who seemed to be their leader. And she began very confidently to wash the shirt, but the more she scrubbed, the bigger the spots grew. "Ha!" cried another troll woman. "It's clear you cannot wash the shirt clean. You can never claim the prince. Let me try." She seized the shirt and went to work. But she did no better. Her scrubbing and rubbing only made the spots bigger and darker. All the trolls clamored to wash the shirt. They took turns, grabbing it from one another, each troll scrubbing away with her claws as hard as she could. The shirt only looked darker and dirtier than ever. The 3 tallow spots did not come out, and by now the night was ending. "You have all tried, and none of you can wash the tallow spots off," cried the prince. "I see a beggar lass standing there. I'm sure she knows how to wash the shirt. Come here, lass," he called. Oh, he knew who she was. He wants her to be the one to wash the shirt. The lass went to him quickly. "Can you wash my shirt clean?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, "but I can try." That's the kind of thing we say when we're not afraid. She took the shirt to the large cauldron of water and dipped the shirt down into it. At once, the shirt became clean and white. When she took the shirt out of the water, the tallow spots were gone. "Yes," said the prince, smiling, "this proves that you are the lass for me." The pack of trolls shrieked in disappointed rage. They scrambled to their feet to attack, but the prince clasped hands with the lass and ran for the shore. At that moment, the sun came up. The trolls, trapped by daylight, turned to stone, where they stand to this day. As for the prince and the lass, the north wind, with a strong gust, lifted them high above the sea and carried them home to their own country. And that is the end. Thank you so much for tuning in for afternoon story time. It is not over yet. We are going to return to our chapter book, Peter Pan. I know we've been going for a while now, so we'll just read a bit more of Peter Pan before we break for our unicorn dance party. For those of you who have just been joining us, who are just joining us now for Peter Pan, where we had left off, oh my goodness, the action of this book was coming to a climax. That's the point where all the action explodes. We had Wendy, John, and Michael decide to go home from Neverland because Wendy was afraid their mother might really miss them. We also had Peter get very angry with Wendy for leaving, even though he's pretending he doesn't care. And we had the Lost Boys decide that they wanted to go with Wendy, John, and Michael back to live with them and their parents. At the same time, the pirates who had plotting against the Lost Boys and Peter Pan for this whole book They attacked. They attacked the tree where Peter and the Lost Boys make their home under the ground. That tree was being guarded by friends of Peter Pan's, who are warriors who live on the island of Neverland. The pirates attacked them. Peter and the Lost Boys heard what was happening. They're waiting under the tree with Wendy, John, and Michael to see when it's safe for Wendy, John, Michael, and the Lost Boys to begin their journey back to London, where Mr. and Mrs. Darling live. They still don't know if the pirates or the brave warriors have won the battle. We're going to see how the battle plays out in this chapter. The pirate attack had been a complete surprise, a sure proof that the unscrupulous Hook had conducted it unfairly. Excuse me, pardon. However, the warriors knew what was happening the moment that the pirates attacked. They knew that the pirates were on the island from the moment that one of them trod on a dry stick. And in an incredibly short space of time, they began to cry out to each other like coyotes to signal that there was danger. Every foot of ground between the spot where Hook had landed his forces and the home under the trees was stealthily examined by the warriors. They found only one hill with a stream at its base, so Hook had no choice. Here, he must establish himself and wait until just before dawn. Everything thus being mapped out with almost diabolical cunning, the warriors folded their blankets around them and they waited above the children's home for the cold moment when they should fight the pirates. Here dreaming, though wide awake, of the exquisite tortures to which they were put him at the break of day, those confiding warriors were discovered by the treacherous Captain Hook. From the accounts afterwards supplied by such of the warriors who escaped the carnage, Hook does not seem to have paused at the rising ground, though it is certain that in the gray light of near dawn he must have seen it. No thought of waiting to be attacked appears from first to last to have visited his subtle mind. He would not even hold off till the night was nearly spent. On he pounded with no policy but to fall to fighting. Around the brave warrior Princess Tiger Lily were a dozen of her stoutest fellow warriors, and they suddenly saw the perfidious pirates bearing down upon them. Fell from their eyes then the film through which they had looked at victory. They knew that they were doomed. But even then they had time to gather in a formation that would have been hard to break had they risen quickly. Thus terrible as the sudden appearance of the pirates must have been to them, they remained stationary for a moment, not a muscle moving, as if the foe had come by invitation. Then, indeed, their tradition gallantly upheld. They seized their weapons, and the air was torn with the war cry. But it was now too late. To what extent Captain Hook is to blame for his cruel tactics on this occasion is for the historian to decide. Had he waited on the rising ground until the proper hour, instead of sneaking up on the warriors, he and his men would probably have been butchered, and in judging him, it is only fair to take this into account. But what he should perhaps have done was at least to acquaint his opponents that he proposed to follow a new method. On the other hand, this, as destroying the element of surprise, would have made his strategy of no avail. So the whole question is beset with difficulties. One cannot, at least, withhold a reluctant admiration for the wit that had conceived so bold a scheme and the fell genius with which it was carried out. What were Hook's own feelings about himself at that triumphant moment? Fain would his pirates have known, as breathing heavily and wiping their cutlasses, they gathered at a discreet distance from his hook and squinted through their ferret eyes at this extraordinary man. Elation must have been in Hook's heart, but his face did not reflect it. Ever a dark and solitary enigma, he stood aloof from his followers in spirit as in substance. The night's work was not yet over, for it was not the warriors he had come out to destroy. It was Peter Pan he wanted. Pan and Wendy and the Lost Boys, but mostly Pan. So he was only attacking the warriors because they were guarding Peter Pan, and that's who he really wanted to fight. Peter was such a small boy that one tends to wonder at Captain Hook's hatred of him. True, he had flung Hook's arm to the crocodile, but even this, and the increased security of life to which it held, owing to the crocodile's pertinacity, hardly account for a vindictiveness so relentless and malignant. The truth is that there was a something about Peter which goaded the pirate captain to frenzy. It was not his courage. It was not his engaging appearance. It was not... There is no beating about the bush, for we know quite well what it was, and have got to tell. It was Peter Pan's cockiness. We've talked about that before. That means that Peter Pan thought a lot of himself. He was full of himself, cocky, conceited, arrogant. He thought he could do anything and that he was better than anyone, and that made Captain Hook furious. This had got on Hook's nerves. It made his iron claw twitch, and it disturbed him at night like an insect. While Peter lived, the tortured man felt that he was a lion in a cage into which a sparrow had come. The question now was how to get down the trees into the home under the ground. He ran his greedy eyes over them. His pirates wriggled uncomfortably. In the meantime, what of the Lost Boys? We have seen them at the first clang of weapons, turned as it were into stone figures, open-mouthed, all appealing with outstretched arms to Peter. And we return to them as their mouths close and their arms fall to their sides. The pandemonium above, that means the chaos, the commotion, the sound of everyone fighting, had ceased almost as suddenly as it arose, passed like a fierce gust of wind, but they know that in the passing it has determined their fate. So which side had won? We already know that the pirates won, but Peter and Wendy and John and Michael and the Lost Boys are listening from underground, so they know that the battle's over, but they don't know who won. The pirates, listening avidly at the mouth of the trees, heard the question put by every lost boy, and alas, they also heard Peter's answer. If the warriors have won, he said, they will beat the tom-tom. It is always their sign of victory. Now, Smee had found the drum, and was at that moment sitting on it. You will never hear the drum again, he muttered, but inaudibly, of course, for strict silence had been enjoined. To his amazement, Hook signed to him that he should beat the drum. why does Hook want Smee to beat the drum? Usually when the drum beats, it means the warriors, who are good guys like Peter Pan. Usually it means they won, but they lost. So why does Hook want his first mate Smee to beat the drum? Slowly, there came to Smee an understanding of the dreadful wickedness of the order. Never, probably, had this man admired Captain Hook so much. Kaylee, be polite. Twice Smee beat upon the instrument and then stopped to listen gleefully. "The drum!" the miscreants heard Peter cry. "A warrior victory!" The doomed children answered with a cheer that was music to the dark pirate hearts above, and almost immediately they repeated their goodbyes to Peter, because remember, they were leaving Neverland. This puzzled the pirates, but all their other feelings were swallowed by a base delight that their enemy was about to come up out of the house under the ground. They smirked at each other and rubbed their hands. Rapidly and silently, Hook gave his orders. One man to each tree, and the others to arrange themselves in a line, 2 yards apart. And tomorrow, we will find out what happens when the pirates encounter Wendy, John, Michael, and the Lost Boys. One quick note about that chapter, and about Peter Pan in general. J.M. Barrie is the author of Peter Pan. We've talked about that a bit. Sometimes he uses words for Peter Pan's allies, the warriors on the island that we've been talking about, the ones who just fought with the pirates. When J.M. Barrie is talking about those warriors, he is talking about people like the Lenape Indians, who we talk about at the beginning of Virtual Storytime every day. He's talking about tribes of people who lived in many parts of the world, but most famously to us in North America, in what we now call the United States, Canada. There were a lot of people living here before white people from Europe came and settled. Settled's the wrong word. They came and took that land for themselves and gave it new names. And they hurt a lot of those Indians when they did it. Now, Kaylee is all over this computer, which is a shame because this is an important conversation. The way that white people tend to think about those people who rightfully own the land where we live now in the United States is racist. They think about those people in a way that is unfair and has to do with their race and the color of their skin. And that racism was even worse in the days a long time ago when J.M. Barrie was writing Peter Pan than it is now. And that means that a lot of the words that he uses to talk about those characters in the book are really not very kind. They're not acceptable to say. They weren't acceptable to say then, and more of us know that they're not acceptable to say now. So a lot of the time when I've been reading this book, I have been changing J.M. Barrie's words so that we can still hear the story of Peter Pan without repeating language that is racist. And I did that more in this last chapter than I have done in other chapters. I want to disclose that so that you know that not all of the words that I just read in that chapter were the precise words that J.M. Barrie wrote. And because that chapter has more of that unacceptable language than many other chapters of Peter Pan, I even thought about just skipping that chapter, but that part of the plot where the pirates have that fight is really important. So, for understanding what happens next in the story. So I left it in, I changed the language, and I wanted to share all of that thinking with you all, because it's important that you know what I know about the stories that I tell you. Otherwise, I am not being honest with you. So that's what was going on in that chapter. If you have other thoughts about it, I'm eager to hear them. And with that, I think we are ready to wait until tomorrow to hear more about Peter Pan. Thank you so much for joining us today for virtual story time from the Newark Public Library. You can join me and Jonathan Van Unicorn every Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. and again at 2 p.m. And in the meantime, it's time to close out with a unicorn dance party. Oh, and we also have virtual bedtime stories every Monday night at 7 p.m. We'll be rebroadcasting our most recent virtual bedtime story tonight at 7 p.m. So feel free to tune in for that. All right, let's close it out with a unicorn dance party. Thank you so much for joining us.
Castle by a waterfall with a pink and purple wall and a princess living there. She had no parents and was all alone, but she got by on her own and she liked it pretty well. Cause she never wore socks and she had a pet snake. She bought a rag guitar and she ate a whole cake, and there wasn't anybody there to tell her what to do, so she did what she wanted to. Everybody knew the story of the princess who saved herself. The princess who saved herself. There was a dragon with a pointy tail. He was bigger than a whale and his breath was terrible. He scared the princess when he came around. Tried to burn the castle down, but she caught him by his tail. Then she tied him to a tree so the dragon couldn't fly. She told him he was mean and it made the dragon cry. When he finally apologized, she offered him some tea. He accepted it graciously. Now he visits every weekend with the princess who saved herself. The princess who saved herself. She was an evil queen. She was wrinkled, old and green, and she hated everyone. She saw the princess in her silver gown, put the poison apple down, asked her where she bought her clothes. So they got the witch a dress, put some makeup on her face. They started up a band, and the dragon played the bass. Every Saturday they play until their fingertips are sore, mostly math, rock, and cuddlecore. And they call themselves the kingdom of the princess who saved herself. The princess who saved herself. The princess who saved herself. The princess who